Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Nerdy Multiverse and yet another breakdown. Today we will be breaking down and giving our initial thoughts on the third episode of the Negan and Maggie spin-off series, The Walking Dead: Dead City. The third episode being titled, People Are a Resource. Now, just to start off, the title of this episode is a callback or Easter egg itself, as the saying people are a resource is something that Negan said all of the time during the original and main series when he was leading the Saviors. The initial right-hand man of the Saviors, Simon, has also gone around saying it as well. Anyways though, this episode starts off in a flashback scene that we get to see a few times throughout this episode, where we see how Negan and Ginny's bond is made, as we see Ginny making her way through the woods before she runs into an impaled walker holding a bag. Negan walks in and puts it down, and sort of gives Ginny a pep talk, telling her that she needs to talk so that if she needs help, he can be there to help her. And we learn at this point, Negan has already been alongside Ginny and trying to find her a safe place to stay for months. And it turns out that the walker that they ran into was somebody that tried to kill them. And Ginny is out here looking around for her dinosaur plushie, as it is missing now. Going back to present day Ginny, as she arrives on shore after she left the settlement with the dirt bike last episode. She looks around and finds an old cooler, which she ends up using as a paddle boat to get to Manhattan Island, as she is clearly looking for Negan. We then cut to Maggie, Negan, and the Tribespeople group, of course being Tommaso, Amaya, and Luther, who Negan and Maggie met and helped out in the last episode. The infamous Walking Dead CGI deer returns and doesn't look half bad this time around, but the group start hitting some antlers together to try and attract the deer to their direction, where Tommaso puts it down, obviously for their next meal. They prepare the deer and we see Luther using some beeswax, which is good for cuts. So Negan asks if he can borrow a bit, but Luther weirdly just flat out says no. And this is where we start to feel a bit of tension between these two characters. Then beginning to discuss plans on how to get inside of the stadium or arena, where Amaya starts talking about what it was like when everything began here, when the world fell, as they were just kids when it all started, saying that they waited and waited for the army to show up, only for them to blow up the bridges and abandon any survivors on the island when they finally got there. The city was relatively safe after a while, and people started to group up together little by little, until the Croat showed up, of course, spreading the same promises that Negan used to when he ran the Saviors himself. But now the Tribespeople and the Barazzi have been in conflict for some time, and only one of them that have been captured by the Barazzi has made it back out of the arena alive. But it was nothing but luck that allowed it. Maggie gets a bit uneasy about that because Herschel is locked up by the man who runs the arena and leads everyone in it. So just by hearing the stories about the place, they're going to need that same luck to get him out of there. Jeannie arrives on the island and we get to see more of the amazing shots of the city, and I really like how this show has felt more real and not just like a set, if you get what I mean by that. Overlooking the arena, we see tons of walkers standing outside of the entrance, and this is because they have a bunch of speakers playing by the doors to keep them attracted to that area specifically, and this is a pretty smart way to keep whatever is inside from getting back out, and to also keep whatever you don't want inside out. And right on time, the vehicle playing music drives by, and Maggie wonders how are they going to get into the arena, and again, Luther is entirely against it and immediately shuts it down. Maggie mentions the sewers, but they've been packed with walkers ever since the army came by, and I do believe that is where we will see some crazy mutated walkers eventually. But of course, if one of them did get out of there, then that means there is a way back inside, and it turns out that Tommaso himself was the one that was able to escape. Amaya seems very keen on going back there herself to get revenge on the Croat for what he has done to her and her people, while Luther is the complete opposite and always shuts it down. And Tommaso seems more afraid of what could happen, especially after what he himself experienced there more than anything. Negan tells a story of a guy down south who promised protection and sanctuary, a story of himself, of course, and how everyone rebelled against him and the Saviors, and how in the end it all worked out for them. Tommaso eventually agrees to speak to everyone else about going into the arena, as 3 more vehicles are seen pulling into the building themselves. Inside of the vehicles are the Croat and his men arriving back back after capturing Pearlie from the last episode. When they take him through the garage, we can see some walkers and tanks, and the Croat's people loading in another walker into another tank that is surrounded by a ton of fuel cans. This is taking people are a resource to a completely different level, as it seems that the Croat is using the walkers as fuel and energy. Now, locked up and handcuffed inside of the arena himself, Pearlie looks over and we see that sitting in the middle of all of it is a steel cage, often used for MMA. Cutting back to the group as Tommaso tells them all how he escaped as he draws out a map of the place to finalize their plans. Clearly scarred, not only mentally, but physically from the things that happened there when he was captured. Explaining that one day they decided to clean out his cell and luck arrived as a walker, or what he calls a fleshy, got in, and he took that opportunity to make a run for it, following the framework and finally finding the tunnels. Negan budges in a bit and says that after the successful escape plan from Tommaso, the Croat would have likely moved any prisoners off-site to prevent any more escapes. They all wonder why he would know this, where Maggie says that is what he would do himself, and then reveals to all of them that Negan and the Croat know each other and that they go way back, discussing how they could use Negan as bait to draw the Croat out. But still, Luther is just so against this all and clearly has something against Maggie and especially Negan as well, saying that they're going to get everyone killed, and for what? Maggie says that it's for her son and to get him back, but he says that her son is already dead and she probably even knows it. Now, after he says this, Negan stands up and defends Maggie, standing by her side in all of this and willing to help her out with this situation, likely more than everyone else that's in this room. Cutting to Pearlie being held in the arena as one of the Barazzi brings in some food and turns on some music as the Croat walks in, introduces himself, and offers the food to Pearlie. But Pearlie does not say a single word the entire time. Speaking of his science profession, alternative energy, and when he first arrived on the island, he decided that the most useful natural source of energy available here is death. When the bodies break down, they begin producing methane, and sensing molecular forces are weak, the gas can be pressurized into a liquid fuel. He then says that what he has built here is a sanctuary, the same exact name of Negan's old headquarters or base, and the same exact thing he used to promise and offer people himself. The Croat begins interrogating Pearlie, asking him why he's there and who he brought with him, but Pearlie still is silent. The Croat then tries to cut into his own food, just to find out that he has been served rotten meat. For failing his own leader, the Croat forces the guy to swallow the key to Pearlie's handcuffs, and then he kills him. Cutting to Maggie as she sits down and opens a little box that has a few pictures inside that she begins looking through. One of her and her father Herschel, and another that I assume is her as a child with her mother. Then grabbing the watch that first belonged to her father Herschel that was then handed down to Glenn. She then unfolds and looks at a drawn picture of Glenn. Finally, she has a picture of him that she can keep, as she hasn't had one before. Negan ends up walking in and gives her a New York City hat, because he remembered that Herschel liked to wear things like that. Then he reassures Maggie that Luther is wrong, still standing by her side, just completely proving to her and everybody watching that he is not a truly evil guy and is really redeeming himself over and over. He sits down and Maggie starts talking about when the Croats showed up to their gates. She told Herschel to go and hide in the cellar, but instead he went and grabbed a shovel and brick just to spite her, which is where she called him stupid, and then he told her to get off of his back for once. And that was the last thing that they said to each other before he was taken. And everyone that she's ever loved in the world that is gone now, all that is left of them is inside that small box. Seeing Maggie open up to Negan is a huge thing. Negan then starts telling her about how a few years ago that Annie, him, and Joshua, and I am assuming that Joshua is the name of his child that he had with Annie, how they were living in a cabin right outside of New Babylon. But one day Annie went into town to do some trading, but she didn't come home in time. So he went out looking for her and found her, beaten and robbed. And she begged him not to do anything stupid, but of course, knowing Negan, he went and looked for the people responsible. He found all 5 of them, and obviously, he ended up killing them, even though he didn't even feel like he wanted to. This could be the reason he is wanted, and these are the 5 people that he killed. killed. Afterwards, they were on the run, but it was hard on Annie, so he put them on a wagon train that was headed towards Missouri and told them that he was right behind them. In reality, he obviously was not. He sent them away, basically left them so that they could be safe. I'm really glad that they did not decide to kill Annie and their kid off, especially off screen. I really like this decision that Negan left for their safety. Cutting to Ginny as she runs through the city as walkers try to get at her, where she ends up tripping over one and losing her dinosaur plushie yet again. Then going back into the flashback between her and Negan as they continue looking through the woods for the same plushie that she just lost again, giving her a lecture on how she needs to speak once more so that he can help her. Then going back to the present day as someone walks up to the walker that tripped her over and puts it down, but then they take the plushie and walk off. So of course, Ginny follows. Cutting to the tribespeople as they sit around a table and present different items of importance, likely ones that belong to loved ones that they are now mourning, as Tommaso does present Esther's necklace. After they present all of their items, they close their eyes and lock hands and begin humming. As we go back and forth between this and the Croat and his people chanting at the MMA cage as he speaks to his people about honoring their fallen brother, who is now being used as their fuel. As he says the famous Negan or Savior line, "People are a resource." Right as we hear him say it, we cut back to Negan as he joins in on what is likely the tradition of the tribespeople group. Maggie does as well after she almost places the drawing of Glenn down but decides to hide it in her hands instead. This scene kind of reminded me of the one from The Hobbit when the dwarves sat around the table and began humming and singing about their mountain and such, if you watch that movie. Going back to the arena as they bring Pearly into the cage after making him breathe in the gases from the tank with the body in it, causing him to see nothing but blurs, where he wakes back up inside of the cage handcuffed to the middle of it, as they throw a walker in the cage with him. He dodges it a few times before getting his handcuffs around it, where he pulls hard enough to make the walker's head fall off. This walker was the Barazzi that was forced to swallow the key, so Pearly cuts it open and gets the key and frees himself from the handcuffs, as 3 more walkers are put in the cage with him. He reaches down to his boots to determine which one he will use, as the other boot has something important in it. He then takes the 3 walkers out very quickly just by using a single boot. Then cutting back to Maggie as she and Tommaso talk about how it's almost time to execute their plan, as the person who took the dinosaur plushie walks in the room, and it turns out that they are a part of the tribespeople group as well. Maggie notices the plushie and ends up taking it, evidently hiding it from Negan, likely because she knows that if he finds out something may have happened to Jenny, he might not help her out anymore because instead he will go after Ginny. Again, going back to Pearly at the arena as the Croat walks back in his cell room and has his men take Pearly's other boot off to see what's inside, as he did notice it during the cage fight, and knows that whatever is inside can break Pearly and make him talk. It turns out that it was a letter inside of the boot, and a very depressing one at that, and this could have been from his brother who took his own life. The Croat reads through the note out loud, which breaks Pearly and makes him talk, saying that it is just him here and that his 2 partners he came with are already dead, and that they came to bring a wanted man home, revealing the name of Negan to the Croat. And speaking of Negan, we go back to him as he looks through the kitchen looking for some weapons to use for when they go to the arena, as Luther practically sneaks up on him, and this is where all of the tension from earlier ends, as Luther presents a wanted poster to Negan and does not let him leave the room. So they get into a scuffle before Negan uses a literal cheese grater to cut Luther's face, after he was being held by Luther's crushing strength. And as he holds his face in pain, he ends up tripping and falling onto a sharp pole of sorts exposed on the floor, landing directly on the head. He's still alive though, so Negan pushes his head down more and finishes him off, as we see Maggie walk outside and put the dinosaur plushie in a can and light a match, ready to set it on fire to completely hide it from Negan, but Ginny is watching all of this happen from behind the car in the alleyway. Going back to the flashback with Negan and Ginny as Negan opens up the bag that was on the walker as it has the plushie inside of it. He gives it back to her and patches it back up, then teaching her the whistle that his wife Lucille used when she needed help, so that Ginny can now use it too instead of speaking. As they hug, clearly Ginny sees Negan as a father figure. We see Negan stand up after putting Luther down, looking down at his hand like he is being reminded of something, his old self, and how flashes of it are coming out, like the showrunner said in the episode Insider, and Maggie lights the match to set the plushie on fire, which is where the episode ends off. And yet another incredible episode. I loved the action and all of the different callbacks in this episode. Seeing the flashbacks and hearing the different stories of these characters was super interesting. I can't wait to see the conflict between the group and the Barazzi, specifically how Negan and the Croat will interact. Super excited for the 4th episode next week, and this episode was an amazing entry for the season. But of course, I would like to hear about your thoughts on this episode as well, so make sure to leave them down below. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed our breakdown and review on this episode, don't forget to give it a like. And with that being said, we will see you all the next time that we go through and explore the nerdy multiverse.